We are live. UFC 310 is in the books. 2024 pay-per-views are in the books, and we are live with the last post-fight show for at least pay-per-view. We got one for you next week. We'll take care of you guys. But Kai Asakura just got choked out by Alexandre Pantoja doing the thing. Kai comes in with a lot of hype. Alexandre does his thing, just gets the win in the second round. We had an exciting main card, and honestly, the entire card was pretty exciting from top to bottom. You had fights and stoppages early from, pretty much the whole way through. But let's just get right into it. Before we get actually into the whole, main event, just overall thoughts on the whole card. Blake, it's been a while, my man. How are you feeling and thoughts on the whole UFC 310 tonight?
Man, I'll tell you what, John, Johan, it is a pleasure. It has been a while since we have been together, and I just want to let everybody know, no, I didn't forget about y'all. No, John didn't forget about us. It was a lot of extracurriculars that happens in life, but I'll tell you what, UFC 310 brought us all together. You know why? Because we're a family. We are a family, and we're here to talk about family stuff, and this family talks only about UFC. And UFC 310, I'm not going to lie, man, I was very excited about it. I was super excited about it. Obviously, every time you get an official number, it's not a fight night. It's not a UFC X versus X. It is a round number, UFC 310. And when I looked at the card originally, I was super pumped. I was like, this is a night that could be full of finishes. And honestly, I wasn't proved wrong. I mean, there was a ton of finishes on this card that I loved. There was a ton of matchups on this card that I loved. There was a ton of people on this card that I loved just to watch as a spectator. So overall, as a card, I feel like I got my, I got my jobbles off, if that makes sense. Holy family. Am I wrong? Oh, shit. Scared me. Oh, Vin Diesel in my face all of a sudden. Scared
Always
me.
talk about family, and that's what came to mind.
We're family.
We got Chris J in the comments. What's going on? Sean Sterling in the comments. What's going on? Yep, some fights didn't live up to it, but definitely a solid card. Continue, Blake.
No, but I thought it was a solid card, man. I thought it was a solid card. We got a lot of finishes. We got some decisions, but there was a lot of people that I thought fought really well, and overall, just I thought it was a really good card. I can't complain about anything on this card. A lot of big names on this card, as well as a lot of guys that are up and coming that I really wanted to do well, and I think they performed themselves.
Absolutely. Johan, thoughts on UFC 310 as a whole?
Yeah, I definitely was very excited about it. I think I overhyped it a lot more in my head than what actually happened, but I also think it was a solid card. I think there were coming into it, there were some fights that I was questionable about, and I was right to be questionable about. But there was also some fights where they kind of surprised my judgment. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but some fights on those prelims were bangers that didn't need to be bangers. So, I mean, I'm ready to get into it, but right now in Tallahassee, it's kind of cold, so I'm like really freezing right now. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. And in the main event, like I said, Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Asakura. And for Kai, if you didn't know him coming in, if you didn't watch Ryzen or didn't watch any film, dangerous man. One punch knockout power. He's got beautiful knees. A lot of the finishes that he did get in Ryzen technically would be illegal here in the UFC, but still dangerous man nonetheless. And from the opening jump, he started off with a jumping knee that almost took off Alexandre's head. Instead of it being the knee, it was the thigh. So Pantoja was able to get down. The striking in the first round, you would think that Kai would have the advantage, but really Pantoja was pouring it on, cutting angles. Kai was making him miss just a little bit, but Pantoja was still relentless through and through. And in the second round, he was able to kind of get the half back. And as Kai was scrambling, he jumped on the back, fought the hands, was able to get the rear naked choke. And that was it. All it took was 2 rounds. I was expecting just a little bit more, but Pantoja starting to cement his name in flyweight history and even calls out Demetrius Johnson. So obviously, if you haven't known that, Demetrius did retire earlier this year. But is this a fight that maybe intrigues him a little bit? I'm not sure, but let's get to the thoughts on the UFC main event performance tonight. Elias. Johan, we'll start with you, my man. Thoughts on Pantoja's defense?
Yeah, I thought it was an impressive performance. I mean, I think that finishing sequence where he jumped on the back and then he kind of transitioned onto the back and kind of got the choke was really fast. I was losing connection on my stream, so I was praying to the Lords that I did not, miss that finish, and I got it just back in time for it. But in the lead up, like Pantoja was having success on the feet. You talked about it earlier. Kai Asakura, he was real good offensively. He was real snappy. He was real quick, threw a lot of hard shots. But the thing is, defensively, he was eating a lot. So he was good at throwing, but when it came to like kind of reacting and kind of the head movement, his head was always on the center line. So Pantoja was always able to catch him with some shots that really Kai couldn't see coming. And I think that also, opened up the ground game. But Pantoja is probably the best scrambler in the UFC, let alone the flyweight division, because the way that he was able to jump on Kai Asakura in the second round, jump on his back, not once but twice, quick like a dime. And I think overall this was an impressive performance. And honestly, like, I think he's in the conversation for greatest flyweight, but I think that, Demetrius Johnson has 11 defenses, but I think that right now in this state, Pantoja is definitely the guy. He's kind of like cleaned out that flyweight division right now because number one ranked is Brandon Royval. He's already beaten him. Brandon Moreno, he's beaten him 3 times. It's really hard to see who's real deserving of that flyweight, of that flyweight title shot. But overall, this performance right here, I mean, beyond impressive. You know what I mean? Kai Asakura was coming in with a lot of hype, dangerous power puncher. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was solid.
Absolutely. And I think Pantoja did such a good job of really killing a lot of that hype, right? Because you thought that if Kai were to win this fight, he would potentially become a megastar in a way, the first champion of that country coming in after, obviously being cut from the UFC and coming back, right? One of those stories that you see like maybe Brandon Moreno-esque when it comes to that side of things. But Pantoja, from the opening jump, you saw the fire, right? You saw him really want this fight. You saw him take offense to a lot of things that Kai Asakura said, and what was getting maybe lost in translation just a little bit, he was still able to show and come out with a lot of remorse in his heart, which seemed like he said he didn't want to come out just to win. He comes out to kill the other person, in his own words. Blake, thoughts on the main event?
Man, I thought the main event was actually really good. I think a lot of people obviously didn't know about Asakura. Me personally, I've known about him, but I had to do some research just because I was like, man, he comes from, was it Horizon? Am I saying it right? Say it again.
Ryzen.
Ryzen, yes. Sorry, Horizon. He comes from Ryzen. It's not. I'm used to one, which is kind of the South Asian Filipino championship that everybody comes from, who's really good. So I had to look this guy up, and every highlight that I saw of him was nasty. I mean, it was nasty. This dude knows how to fight. He is no chump to the game, and he's not a novice by any means. So I thought Pantoja had a lot on his hands with this guy. And honestly, I'm not going to lie, I was rooting for him. I kind of really wanted him, especially being one of only 7 guys of Japanese descent being in the UFC. I was like, hey, he's a newcomer. I think he shows a lot of experience in his fight game. I think he could be the guy that could beat Pantoja. Clearly, I was wrong. I mean, Pantoja, he's one of those fighters that I don't think anybody really loves. I don't think anybody is just like, oh my God, my favorite fighter in the UFC is Alexandre Pantoja. Like, nobody really says that. But at the end of the day, he's the man. And it's because maybe he does it in an ugly fashion. Maybe it's not as exciting because he's a huge grappler, and so therefore he's not getting the Lyoto Machida versus Vitor Belfort knockout, the kick front, like the front kick, teep kick. Like, he's not getting those type of wins, but he is a grind you out, dirty, not dirty in his play, but just dirty, grimy, I'm gonna get you type of fighter. And so I was maybe that type of viewership was making me expect Asakura to take him out. And Pantoja tells you why tonight he is the champion of that division in the UFC. There is a step above when you are a UFC champion, and there is a whole lot of clout that comes behind that. And I think he showed tonight exactly why he is the champion. Because no matter what, no matter how many shots you hit him with, no matter how good you think your grappling is, he's better. He's better. I say that in somebody who's like not a super Pantoja fan, but I recognize real, man. The dude is good, and he withstood storms and was able to get the finish, and that's just impressive, man. It's scary when you think about everything going on in the division. It's scary. Like, who's going to take him on next, John?
Yeah, it's tough to say, right? Like, somebody threw it up in the comments who should be next. Because Brandon Moreno, I think, is number one. Is that correct?
Well,
right?
and was it Moreno?
Brandon Royval is number
Both
one.
Brandons are 1 and 2 though.
Yeah,
Was
and
it Brandon
Marcel
Moreno?
saying I don't think anybody here was saying greatest flyweight ever, so I'm not sure why Marcel is getting this upset, because nobody thought Kai was going to come in and dog walk, right? We always thought that Kai had the potential to create damage because of that one punch knockout power. So not sure kind of why he's worried there. But Sean said if Kai lets it get passed around, that was a good take by Sean, because the power early with the flyweights, that's where you're going to see it. And Derek Page with a really good point, saying Pantoja looks like the T1000 when he fights. No emotion, just keeps moving forward. With that one, was it beautiful?
Hey, that was the name of my fantasy team this year, the T1000s. So, but I will say this, and Johan and John, I both want to know your answer. Was it? I think John remembers. Was it Brandon Moreno that fought him? That I thought it was you and me, John. I thought Moreno beat him.
Yeah, it was the Brandon Moreno fight.
It was his first belt. It was his first belt win.
Yeah.
And Moreno ended up fighting a really good fight, even though he broke his hand.
Yes.
Right. So it was a very close fight.
I thought Moreno won in that fight. That's why
I'd have to
rewatch
it, to be honest.
Yeah,
but that was
I would have to rewatch it, but I think my initial reaction was that Pantoja edged it out just because of the grappling. The grappling was just so superior compared to compared to like, but Moreno had the edge on the striking, and I think conditioning wise, I think he was a lot fresher than Pantoja. But Pantoja's grappling was a little more dominant.
We're also talking about old stuff. Like, it's not even relevant at this point. I just remember when the fight happened, I was like, I don't know. So to see it come full force, I thought Pantoja's striking this fight was so much, leaps and bounds better than what it was in that fight.
Yeah, I feel like Pantoja's like his overall game is just kind of like not evolving, but getting a lot sharper as he makes these defenses.
Yes.
He had to go against a much sharper striker, so I'm sure during this camp that's something that he was working on a lot, and like you guys said, it's going to be interesting to see who that next challenge is for him. It's really a bunch of guys that he's beat at this point. I would have loved to maybe see a Moreno extra fight. I know they fought a couple times before, also in the Ultimate Fighter they fought, right? So it would be interesting to see, because that last fight with broken hand is a little bit tougher to judge. But let's move on to this.
Hold on real quick, John, before you go, the last 3 fights that Pantoja has gone all 5 rounds, unanimous, split decision. If that tells you anything, he was unable to finish he wasn't able to finish Steve Erceg, which I thought that was somebody he would, if you're the champion. Steve Erceg was a great up and comer. He didn't finish him. And that's a guy that I thought he would have finished because Steve Erceg is a little bit, I don't want to say inexperienced, but he's just a little greener around the gills. Then you had Moreno and Roval, and he didn't finish any of those three guys. So the fact that he was able to finish Asakura, I think speaks a lot about his ability, but it also speaks a lot about where Asakura came from and how much faith everybody put behind him. Was he really that good? Because the last three fights, he couldn't finish nobody. And then he finished Asakura. So, like, you know, it's just something to take into account.
Yeah, it's tough to judge, non-UFC competition versus UFC competition, right? Also, the rule set's a little different as well, right?
And I
Maybe some
agree.
of those grounded positions go a little bit differently when you're able to throw some more knees. But yeah, I mean, it was a interesting main event when it comes to that one. Pantoja got it done. But I want to talk about this co-main event because there's a lot of implications coming out of this fight, and I'm curious. It makes me more curious about the title fight than I previously was, right? I think with Shavkat Rakhmonov retaining his O against Ian Garry and taking his O, um, it was not necessarily the performance that I thought it was going to be, right? The first two rounds, not much striking. Shavkat really dominating the clinch, pushing Ian Garry up against there. 2-0 after that one. In the third round, Ian Garry really started opening up with some kicks, going low with the leg kicks to Shavkat, and he won that third round. In that fourth round, instead of Shavkat just clinching up against the cage, he actually shot a double and went for the legs and was able to secure a really good takedown where Ian, in a way, in a smart way, I guess, closed the guard to maybe mitigate the damage. Obviously, Shavkat, a guy with 100% finishing rate coming into the tonight's fight, so mitigated some damage, but did lose the round. So it was 3-1 going into the fifth. And here's where it got just a little bit interesting. Ian Garry was able to actually get the back of Shavkat Rakhmonov and was actually quite close to getting that rear naked choke to sink in. It was more so a neck crank when he was able to get the hands locked in, but it was the most danger that we've probably seen Shavkat in his entire career, to be honest. And he was able to, Shavkat was spin out of the body triangle, end up on top, finish the round there, and 3-2 Shavkat Rakhmonov on a unanimous decision, able to get the win. And now it's going to be Shavkat versus Bilal Muhammad. And I think some of the luster of Shavkat Rakhmonov, in my opinion, might have came off with the lackluster performance against Ian Garry. I'm not sure if you guys feel the same way. Elias, thoughts on the on Shavkat's performance?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that like it hindered him or anything, but I think yeah, definitely the mystique of the boogeyman, it's a little less like the steam is like less, but I think also it shows that Ian Garry is at fights at an elite level. I wasn't real. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't a real believer in Ian Garry. He wasn't like his last performance against MVP really didn't impress me at all. But I definitely think if he had an advantage, I definitely think that his jiu-jitsu and his grappling were going to give him an edge. I was a little scared to see Shavkat get his back taken by Ian Garry, but that turn was fantastic. It'll be interesting though, because if Ian Gary's able to do that, I wonder what's going to happen when he's paired up against Bilal, who's 100% wrestle heavy and who's going to constantly put pressure on you and kind of trying to wear you out. So it's going to be interesting to see. Overall, I think Shavkat did enough to win, but it puts a fight against Bilal. It looks like Bilal, there might be a chink in the armor, and I think Bilal can take advantage of that. I don't know who would win. I have to kind of look at tape, but it gives me a little less doubt that Shavkat can like just dominate.
Absolutely. I thought he would, have a lot more success when it comes to the striking tonight. That's what surprised me the most, right? He did land a couple of good shots against Ian Garry in the first round, a beautiful overhand that just, snapped Gary's head back, a nice spinning back kick that landed beautiful to the body. So Shavkat did have some success in the striking, but it wasn't what you've seen out of Shavkat in a lot of his earlier fights against some, also potentially good strikers, Jeff Neal, right? He was much better in the striking against Jeff Neal, much better striking against other fighters. Not sure if Ian Gary's style was just that awkward to him or that confusing to him, but he was able to more so get the domination through the grappling, which against somebody like Bilal Muhammad, who pushes that pace and uses that pressure and is always on the front, has great counter wrestling, great offensive wrestling. Is that something that you'll be able to do against somebody like Bilal Muhammad? Or maybe was this a fight where you go out there and you try to stay safe and not take as much damage so you are good for that title fight when Bilal is ready? So that may be the strategy with that one. Blake, thoughts on that co-main event?
Yeah, I have a question for you both. When it comes to Shavkat Rakhmonov and his fight versus Ian Garry, was this more of a failure on Shavkat to really show his skills, or was this really somebody who I believe is kind of a heel within the UFC? I think Ian Garry kind of brings himself off as a heel. Maybe not like the most traditional heel, but or was this really more of a testament to how good Ian Garry is? Because if you really look at Shavkat's record, there's really nobody until the last 4 fights. It's Neil Magny, who he got in a guillotine. It's Jeff Neal, who he got in a rear naked choke. It's Stephen Thompson, who we got in a rear naked choke, but it's an old Stephen Thompson. It's not really Wonder Boy that we knew from years ago. And then it's Ian Machado, who he won by unanimous decision. So is it more of this was a failure upon Rakhmonov, or was it Ian Garry showed a little bit more than we're used to? What do you think?
Johan?
It's interesting. I think this was Shavkat's toughest test. I think you're talking about a fight where it's prime for prime. Like these guys both coming in undefeated. Ian Gary's in his prime. Shavkat's in his prime. And I think that, Ian Garry was coming in with the utmost confidence too. You know what I mean? So he was kind of respecting him and all that. And like that's the biggest thing. I think that, it's interesting. Like I kind of didn't think about it when you said it, but yeah, a lot of his competition, Neil Magny, Jeff Neal, Stephen Thompson, they were like either in the lower half of the rankings or past their prime. And this was his first guy that was like in his prime, undefeated, full of
Yeah.
confidence. I think this was a tough test, but I also think it was a reality check because you saw how Shavkat kind of, adjust and kind of really, push through and kind of change his strategy. He couldn't really be as creative as he usually is because he was fighting a guy who also had smart intangibles just like him. The only issue that I have now is, when you fight Bilal Muhammad, he's a smart guy when it comes to his strategy. And the thing about his strategy is that, it's constant. You're going to need a lot of cardio. You're going to need a lot of, just like real like muscle endurance to really constantly defend takedowns and stuff. But I think the biggest thing too is Ian Gary's not as strong as Bilal, and Ian Garry was able to take his back.
Yeah.
It'll be an interesting that matchup is going to be interesting because I think strength is going to be the biggest factor in that fight.
I will say that I think sorry to the commenter. I think Garry got real close to that rear naked choke, and it was scary for Shavkat. Like, I mean, he was worrying real bad about that rear naked choke. And I just think that nobody thinks of Ian Garry like that. So that's why I'm curious. Was this more impressive of Ian Garry, or was this less impressive of Shavkat?
For me, I think it was less impressive on Shavkat.
I agree.
I think I like Ian Garry. I think he has a really good skill set, but I think
I thought he
against
fought a really good fight for him,
right.
but I do think that a lot of people expected more of Shavkat.
Absolutely. I think Shavkat, with what you expected coming in this fight, I expected a finish from Shavkat in the second or third round, right? I feel like Ian Garry has shown to be hittable in some of his other fights, right? He took damage in some other fights. He has to withstand a little bit of pressure. Ian Garry didn't necessarily have to go through a lot tonight, right? He
No,
lost
no, we
those
didn't.
rounds, but he didn't have to go through a lot of damage. He didn't have to go through much danger with any submissions, right? He was able to withstand most of what Shavkat threw out there, and it was just mostly just neutral, slightly leaning towards Shavkat for the winning times that Shavkat got tonight. So I think it was less impressive on Shavkat. I think Ian Garry has a really good skill set. I think there are some things I want to see that maybe a little bit more out of him against some more elite competition, maybe not, a Fluffy Hernandez or things like that, right? I think this is also on Ian Garry's side, right? The toughest competition that he's got so far, right? A lot of the guys that he's fought so far aren't necessarily on the par of this, and obviously it's easy to say against a guy that's undefeated, right? But like Johan said, it was prime for prime this time, and I'm not sure if Ian Garry has the ceiling of a UFC welterweight champion after looking at this fight, because what happens when you go against a guy that is more wrestling dominant, right? Someone that actually, instead of clinching up, will drop down against your hips and potentially wrestle you. All right, man, maybe that's what we see next. What we see is maybe Colby Covington versus Ian Garry. Maybe that's the next matchup. Obviously, Colby Covington fighting Joaquin Buckley next Saturday in Tampa. So that's an interesting one. But to your point, or to your question, Blake, I do think it was a little bit more of a stain on Shavkat, rather a victory than for Ian. Beautiful. So yeah, I mean, I think Johan, he already answered with that, but I think the next question is, I mean, we kind of answered it already, but Johan, just give me a quick preview and a quick prediction. We'll do a quick prediction for the UFC welterweight championship. Shavkat Rakhmonov, Bilal Muhammad. Who you got? What happens?
It's crazy to say that I'm going to say this, but I think Bilal Muhammad is going to win 5-round decision. Not based off this performance. I won't say it's just based off of the Shavkat. This kind of supported my thing, but I feel like people are going to disrespect Bilal Muhammad as a champion just because he's so wrestling heavy and his fighting style is so entertaining. It's the most entertaining in the UFC, quote unquote. I just think that constant wrestling, that constant pressures so hard to like plan for and hard to just defend. So I'm going with Bilal.
Blake, who you got in that one?
I think Bilal's stand-up game is trash, and I'm sorry, I do, but I think that Shavkat. Here's the deal. I think Shavkat is going to have a lot to learn from this fight, and just knowing how those guys react to kind of a decision fight or a lesson learner, they learn real well. And I think it's going to be Shavkat that's the champion, because here's my problem. I'm not that super impressed with Bilal. I never have been. I think he's a great fighter. Could he kick my ass? In 2 seconds he could. Like, this is just me speaking as a commentator. Like, I'm not out here like, oh, I don't think he's that good. No, I think he's amazing. But I think the problem is he doesn't have in his division the type of guys that would come out there and whoop your fucking ass off the jump. And I think Shavkat coming off of this win, but it was something that taught him a lot of lessons. I think he's going to learn instantly, use his training camp to fix those issues that I think he faced here, whether it was weight cut, whether it was training, whether it was just underestimating his opponent. I don't care. I think Shavkat's coming off, and I think Shavkat gets the win, man.
I can understand that. For me, I'm gonna also agree with Johan. I'm gonna go with Bilal Muhammad. I understand
you guys fucking suck.
He doesn't have necessarily right. You guys don't say like this the striking. I mean, he knocked out.
He stopped John Brady.
He stopped Sean Brady, and also
but
and he
caught John
outstruck
Brady on some bull. Like
it
wasn't. It was good.
That's easy to say after he was undefeated in that fight too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It's easy to say after he gets knocked out. So I'm not saying Bilal has knockout or he's going to go out there and dog walk I don't think Elias is saying that either. That he's going to go out there and dog walk
I agree.
Shavkat, but he outstruck Leon Edwards, as well. With even in the stand up, he was super impressive. He was landing the jab and he was mixing it up really well.
And I will say this about that fight: Leon Edwards got in his own head on that fight. I truly believe that. I think Leon got in his own head, and he thought so much about the takedown that he stopped his stand-up game because he was so worried about being taken down, because we know Bilal would beast him on the ground. So this again,
We didn't know that though
personal
at the
opinion.
time. We didn't know that because what did he do against Colby Covington? What did he do against Kamaru Usman? He stuffed those takedowns. So
He
at
was
the
getting
time,
his ass
we
beat by
didn't know
Kamaru
that.
Usman.
At the time,
He
we
was
didn't
getting
know
his
that.
ass beat by Kamaru Usman. Ground and feet.
The second
Didn't
fight.
matter.
But I think when it comes to Bilal, I think the pressure, and I'm not talking about just wrestling. I'm talking about when he comes forward, it makes fighters really hesitate. Like if you've been in a sparring session,
Because his head is this big, it just fucking gets
bro.
you.
But it works. You know what I mean? If you've been in a sparring session, you know that if you're fighting a wrestling dominant fighter, it's really hard to kind of throw what you really want, because any type of opening, he's gonna close the distance. And
Yes,
Bilal is super good at just closing distance, even at such a far gap.
exactly.
He's so good at that. So I mean, I know Leon Edwards is kind of like the worst example because mentally he's like he crumbles like fast. But with Shavkat, I'm wondering with this matchup if he's gonna have that hesitation, or if he's gonna think twice, because Bilal has that. Bilal just comes forward. It's just 100% go. Counter wrestling, all that. He just knows where to be. And I wonder if Shavkat is going to kind of be kind of selective in his shots like he was tonight against Ian Garry, because that would be a problem. That would be a big problem in that fight. He could lose like 4 rounds if he's selective like that.
And what I will say about Bilal, and I'll give you both credit, or not that you guys gave him the credit, but I'll give you guys both credit on the fact that Bilal is really good at staying in his lane. He knows what he does great, and he sticks to it. He does not deviate from the fucking plan. He sticks to it. So I could see how, if Shavkat plays into his game, that it is a bad night for Shavkat, because Bilal comes out there and does what he does. But I just think something in my mind thinks Shavkat is going to learn a lot from this fight versus Machado Garry. He's going to learn a lot. And those dudes download data like it's nobody's business. They just do. I don't know what it is. And I'm not even though he's Kazakhstani, he might as well be Dazakhstani. You know what I'm saying? Like, he might as well be in that same realm. Like, he's one of those guys that if you do something that beats him even in 1 round, he freaking downloads that stuff, man. And I think he got real caught off guard with how good Machado was. And he's either going to check himself or he's going to check what he did against Bilal. But I think either way, it's going to be a phenomenal fight. I can't wait for it.
No, it should definitely be an exciting one. Go ahead, Elias.
I would definitely think Bilal's more Dazakhstani than Shavkat, because Bilal's the
You
one.
think so?
He's the one training with Khabib's team like 24/7. I definitely think so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
No,
that's
and
true.
then
That's
Sean's
true.
saying
You're
is
right.
is Kamaru next
You're
for
right.
Garry? I would lean more towards Colby just because of the beef. That's a beautiful fight night main event against that one. But let's move on. I mean, we got still a bunch of fights to cover on this one. And I want to talk about this, in my opinion, robbery, right? Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov. Not the fight that the first one was at all. Cyril Gane really dominated that first fight. For Alexander Volkov, it's interesting. We're almost seeing a second prime out of this guy, and we're seeing a resurgence out of his career. So shout out to Volkov for just being the dominant fighter. We're seeing that improved wrestling game, him be able to take Cyril Gane down and be on top, which is something that he wasn't able to do. But won't get too much into the fight because essentially it was a robbery at the end of it, right? It was super insane. And Actually, let me break it down because that way, if anybody didn't watch, at least you can know what's up. But round one, Volkov with a takedown, gone with a nice get up. And he won, I believe, round one, right? And then Volkov, round two, beautiful spinning back fist, was able to take it down and 1-1 going into the third. That's what everybody knew. It was 1-1 going into the third. In the third round, Volkov essentially got a takedown, but Gon was holding him in a stalemate with a half attempted Kimura throughout of it. But Cyril Gon was the one that was actually on the bottom for about 4 minutes of that 5 minutes in that round. At the end of the fight, 2 out of 3 judges gave the fight to Cyril Gon. And even the coaches for Cyril Gon were absolutely shocked. I was shocked. I did not think it was going to go that way. I think Volkov got super robbed in that, and I kind of feel like shit for the man because, I mean, hey, you lose half your money with that win bonus when it comes to that. But, yeah, I mean, super, super tough decision. Another one, we had Mofsar versus Aljo, which was a tough one as well to call. But Blake, did you think this was a robbery? How did you score this one?
100%. I thought this was a robbery. I thought Volkov looked way better on his striking. He had the ground game. Even if you don't want to say that he did much on the ground game, even if you don't want to say that, he was at least in a dominant position. So, but that aside, his striking looked really good. Like, I don't know. I was I was shocked when they gave Cyril Gon, and I know why they did it, and it's political, but I do not agree with the outcome. Volkov would have been on a 5-fight win streak had they given him the win. 5 fights at the heavyweight division. You're getting a title shot. I don't care. But I think I don't know, and I'm not saying this inside job. I'm just saying the judges had a predetermined outcome and they did not watch that fight. I'm sorry. It was just a robbery. You said it. Johan, I think probably might agree with me. I don't know. I know he's a very independent thinker himself. But I did not like any of that. And I thought, man, Volkov deserves the next upcoming shot, even though we know heavyweight division is a little weird because you got John Jones as the heavyweight division champion, and he's going to get whatever fight he wants. Does not matter what the rankings is. But I did not agree with that at all, and I thought Volkov won that fight. Johan.
Oh, I think here's the thing. I definitely thought, heavyweight Paddy Pimblett won the fight. I just, it really did shock me because the performance, I think it was one of Alexander Volkov's best performances to date. He was changing levels so well on the feet, and it was definitely Cyril Gon's worst performance to date. I think, it was a very uncharacteristic Cyril Gon performance because you saw, he was moving very flat-footed and very stiff, and that's not a typical Cyril Gon, striking exchange. He's very light on his feet, bouncing in kind of like a karate taekwondo stance, popping out jabs, popping out leg kicks and stuff like that. He did say he had a broken toe, but and I think that could hinder mobility in a bit. But man, he just didn't look. He didn't look sharp in any aspect of the fight, though. So, the grappling, where yes, broken toe is going to affect it. He was not sharp on the grappling. He was getting reversed a lot in exchanges, and it was a really sloppy performance, and that's what kind of boggles me about the decision because it was such a sloppy performance against a guy who was on point with his grappling, with his reversal grappling, with his submission defense. And of course, I already said the striking exchange, and Jonathan mentioned it, man, that spinning back fist was so crisp, like, mwah, that alone should have won the fight. But,
Yeah, that was nice.
I think it taints the rankings in the heavyweight division because had Volkov officially won, you would have had a fresh challenge for John Jones or Tom Aspinall, even though Aspinall already, handled that, it's a different version of Volkov. 5-fight winning streak, confidence at a utmost high, career resurgence. Now it's like we're at stagnation again in the heavyweight division. That's kind of how it feels.
Yeah, it's unfortunate when in a division where there is so much stagnation and you want to see someone separate themselves from the pack, that something like this happens. Like you said, Blake, he would have been on a 5-fight win streak and could have been easily right in line and after a dominant performance and going into fight, maybe John Jones retires or he goes and he fights someone else, and then you get Tommy Aspinall versus Volkov as his first defense, right, for the interim championship or whatever it may be with that. But hey, we may not see that. I'm curious to see with that one. Aspinall already finished Volkov, right? But Jones finished Gone. I mean, it's tough, right? Because all these guys finished each other in some sort of way already, and Aspinall essentially steamrolled through most of the division on his way up. With a lot of the heavyweights out here too. But let's move on to this next fight, because this one honestly was really a boring fight until it wasn't, right? It was Kron Gracie jumping the guard for 2.5 rounds until out of nowhere, essentially, what's his name? Bryce Mitchell was able
Mitchell.
to get
Don't ever forget.
It's not remember the name Bryce Mitchell, sorry. But with Bryce Mitchell, I mean, those 2 elbows put him beautifully. I'm not sure if that was an early stoppage. I mean, Kron was definitely like shook, but that was a really quick stoppage in my opinion. Like the
Thank
ref
goodness.
Do you know why though, John?
Maybe because
do you see why it was a quote unquote, in your opinion, early stoppage?
I don't think it was an early stoppage by any means. I just think it was a really quick stoppage, just like the elbows, like just 2 elbows really quickly. I would expect maybe just 1 or 2 more, but I'm not sure if some people are saying he went out. I'm not sure. Like I didn't really see him go.
I don't think it's because he went out. The reason I think it was because when he tried to get body triangle on Bryce while he was around him, when Bryce slammed him, his head bounced. And then immediately after head bouncing off of the canvas, elbow. Like, that's a little, at that point as a referee, if you listen to Herb Dean, he's talked about this before. My biggest thing is keeping the fighters' health together.
No, I want to see a war.
When you bounce, say that again.
I said, no, I want to see a war.
No, John, dude, I'm with you. I want to too. I want to as well. But I get why they stopped it. He bounced his head off, and then 2 immediate elbows. 1 elbow, which I believe broke his nose, of Kron Gracie. That's why they stopped the fight. It was head bounce, elbow. That to me is, I now have to protect the fighter because I don't know if he's out. He might not be out, but goddamn, he's getting fucked up. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong at all. I think the comments are just hilarious right now.
I don't see the comments.
No, it's funny because all 3 of us are in relationships, but it's all good. All good there. Shout out to the female friends. Shout out to the girlies that let us run these shows.
Yeah, you're right. These 3 never fought in our life. We did a lot of other things, but we didn't fight UFC. So I appreciate you, Jose Campos. I probably never fought in your life as well, but it happens.
Oh yes, all 3 of us go in the same room after we're done here. Clip
no, we're getting
clip
it.
that and quote that, my
just
man. Clip that and quote that. We'll get the angles all going inside everything too. But
shit, Jose.
Well, hateful language gets you going with that. So let's get you
out, bro.
Yep.
You
out, buddy.
You
going. But yeah, let's just get about this main opener, right? I think this was probably one of the most exciting fights of the night, honestly. Duho Choi versus Nate the Train, absolutely dominating Nate the Train, right? This was something I did not expect to see happen. I thought Nate the Train was going to come out with a lot more energy, a lot more excitement, but Duho Choi outclassed the man from the start. Beautiful boxing, beautiful head movement, and was able to get the TKO, essentially just getting him in a crucifix multiple times and just making it a position where he was not able to do anything. Nate just had nothing to offer in this fight. And I think it was one where Doo Ho Choi, in my opinion, usually you see the young, not the younger, but the more up and coming fighter make his name against a guy like Doo Ho Choi. But man, again, another guy that's showing later in his career, kind of having a little bit of a resurgence. But Marcel with a great point. Choi made Nate show his age, right? Not a lot of people have, because Nate usually brings that extra energy against the people that he's fighting. But Doo Ho did make him feel that age. Blake, thoughts on that main card opener, my man?
First off, my thoughts on Sean Sterling's comment is, I'm sitting down, bro. I can't do nothing. I'm sitting down. Come on. Don't label me like that. Second off, I've always been a huge fan of Doo Ho Choi. I think he's one of those guys that has never
Hall of
fought
Famer
enough.
Doo Ho Choi.
Exactly.
Don't forget
UFC
it.
Hall of Famer Doo Ho Choi. He's never love you too, Sean. He's never gotten the chance to fight with volume in the UFC. So he's never built a huge fan base in the UFC. But there's one thing I love about those dudes. They know how to fight. And his boxing, damn, dude, if you watch his old highlights, not even before he was in the UFC, but even in the UFC, the dude knows how to box, and he's precision with it. If you look at Nate Landwehr, he's a brawler, all right? He's way better brawler than Clay Guida. Clay Guida is just throwing hands because he doesn't know what else to do. Nate Landwehr, who is from Clarksville, Tennessee, same place that I went to college at. Shout out Clarksville. Let's go. But Nate Landwehr knows how to brawl, but his boxing is not A1. And that is exactly what Doo Ho showed tonight. Doo Ho's boxing is freaking on point, my man. He knows how to point you up. And if you don't know how to point him back, his points are going to turn into power, and his power is going to turn into knockouts. That it just is the way it is. So I think Landwehr, this should have been an amazing fight, and it really was a great fight. Dude, Sean, thank you so much. You're always fantastic. I love you in the comments every time. But no, if you really look at it, Doo Ho was a superior matchup. The only reason he would have been an inferior matchup is because most people didn't know what his game was, and also his record does not show that he is a superior fighter. That's all I'm going to say.
Elias, thoughts on that main card opener?
Yeah, I agree with Blake. I'm a huge fan of the Korean Superboy, man. I remember watching him in 2016 when he fought Thiago Tavares and got that quick stoppage. So precise, so precision. I think, coming back from Korean military, it's like he became more rejuvenated as a fighter. What I noticed in this fight, first off, Nate Landwehr just going, like, pressing forward, like, with this high guard. I thought it was stupid, first off, because it was like wide open in the center, so those uppercuts were money. But you noticed that, before he came back from the military, Doo Ho Choi was very slick with his boxing, very slick, very just kind of like placing his shots, more accuracy than anything. But you see that there's a lot more power to his shots. They're a little heavier. He has a little more heavy hands. He packed on a little bit of muscle too. So those shots were doing some damage, and those shots made Nate back up and respect his power. And I feel you saw a bit of hesitation throughout the rest of the fight in the stand-up game, and that opened up the ground game for Doo Ho Choi, because those judo tosses that he was dishing out were so beautiful. Those were so beautiful. He literally, I think, honestly, Doo Ho Choi dominated on all aspects of the fight. I mean, yeah, I think he just dominated on all aspects. I think, I think we're seeing a resurgence in his career. If he packs on a couple more wins, we can see him in maybe potentially a fight night main event, maybe going for a title. It's just I'm looking at him. He has some power in his hands now. He's loading up on some shots, but yet he's still a smart, intangible fighter like he's always been. It's like there's a maturity to his style now.
Absolutely. And with that too, it's like, he's able to, like you said, sit down on some of those punches, right? He's able to have a lot more, and it's always lovely when we get the racial comments in there, just showing your true colors there, buddy. It's lovely. Maybe we get some
Get the
cyber.
fuck out of our comments, bro.
It's
You want to
always
bring
good.
that dumb shit?
Maybe we get some
Get the fuck out
cybersecurity
of here.
friends dox you because you don't want to show your face and hide behind a little, emoticon there. But
What a piece of
um
shit.
but yeah, Duho Choi, man, just sitting down on these punches, like you said, just having a little more of that grown man strength with that one. But main card overall was a lot of fun. Blake, I know, I mean, we're closing up on an hour here. Before we close out here, we're gonna get to touch on some of these main events, but yeah, Sean, we're gonna talk about Sean Hooper or Chase Hooper for
Trust me.
sure. But Blake,
I
what was your favorite prelim fight?
honestly, I think Sean might have brought it up. I loved what Chase Hooper did in the ring tonight, man. In the octagon, Chase Hooper. I remember I think Joe Rogan interviewed him and he said, "Oh, last time you came in here you were 20." I believe Chase Hooper was 19 actually when he stepped in the octagon. 19 years old, and he is a student of one of my favorite fighters ever, not necessarily a favorite in the UFC, but Ben Askren. And he learned a lot from Ben Askren. Not obviously not in the striking realm, but he learned a lot from the wrestling realm. And I think he showed tonight how much that little bit of nugget of information he used to then transition into the striking. His striking looked fantastic tonight. That's something I actually never thought we'd see from Chase Hooper. But his striking looked really good, and even Joe Rogan mentioned it. But not that Joe Rogan's the above all be all, but I'm just saying, like, even somebody who was interviewing afterwards noticed a big difference from his previous fights. But his flow on the ground, man, dude. Yeah, he used to joke that Ben Askren was his dad. That is Marcel. You're 100% right. He used to bring him on and say, "This is my son, Chase Hooper." But no, dude, I think Chase looked so good. I mean, he looked his ground game was his flow was fantastic. He was getting in out of everything and anything. He knew exactly where to go. He knew exactly where to put his feet, his hands, his knees, when to flip, the whole 9 yards. And then on top of that, he added a stand-up game / ground game that I was super impressed by. And I'm gonna have to hop off here in a second, but no, man, Chase Hooper might have been my most didn't think it would be, but was probably my most favorite fight of the prelims because he just looked real good and he's still so young, 25 years old. The kid has a 10-year career ahead of him at least. So imagine what he'll look like now in 3 years when he's probably going to be at least a top 10, top 5 contender.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the ceiling for him. I think before tonight, you still had a little bit of he was still rough around the edges because he was primarily a grappler, right? You saw a lot that with him. Sean's giving you some love, Blake, saying you're always great as
Appreciate it, Sean.
expected, with that. But man, like you said, this was the most comfortable that we've ever seen Chase Hooper and on the stand up with that side of things. And when you have that and he's able to mix it with the level of grappling that he had tonight, I mean, he might have
Yeah.
severely damaged Clay Guida's shoulder or elbow
Yes.
if we're being honest with that one.
The way he held on to that arm bar in multiple different positions, he did not let Clay Guida, somebody who's I assume Clay Guida would end up in the UFC Hall of Fame only because of his longevity. I mean, I would assume the guy has to be, right? Like maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah, him,
I'm
guys
usually
like Jim
the only
Miller,
time I've ever been
you know.
wrong is when my girlfriend tells me I'm wrong. But but I think that when you look at what he did to him, of somebody who's been in some absolute wars. I mean, remember Clay Guida's fight versus Diego Sanchez? I mean, that's one
Oh
of the
my
all-time
gosh.
greatest fights of all time. So when you look at something like that, and then you see what Chase did to him tonight, it was really impressive.
Super impressive with that. And obviously, Clay Guida on the tail end of his career, like Sean said, 18 years for Clay is crazy. With that, I mean,
Crazy.
his UFC career can go and essentially, get is a legal adult at this point.
Yeah.
How far his UFC career is, and yeah, I mean, just Chase Hooper though. Shout out to the man because he was another one. And we'll get to the Anders versus Weidman. We'll touch on that one a little bit, but I want to talk about one of you guys said a little bit earlier, Aljo versus Movsar Evloev, because in my opinion, this was the fight that should have been in the main card instead of Kron Gracie versus remember the name Bryce Mitchell, right? So yeah, I mean that fight, just how that one ended was insane. Happy holidays to you too, Derek Page. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year's, everybody. You know what I mean? Hope you guys all enjoy it with that. But stay safe out there, Derek. Out there in the holidays, people get crazy, especially in the holidays. Make sure you don't, fight nobody for a PS5 or something. But yeah, I think for Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling, one of the best grappling fights that you will ever watch. These scrambles, the back and forth, it was it was just absolutely it was exciting. You don't get to see grappling that is this exciting very often, right? It's usually very one-sided. Maybe someone's trying to throw up a couple of submission attempts, but this was the fight that should have been on the main card against instead of Bryce Mitchell versus Kron Gracie. Kron Gracie, unranked, couple of fights under his name. Bryce Mitchell, 13th ranked, coming off of a knockout versus a rather undefeated Movsar Evloev and a former champion coming off of a win in a new weight class in Aljamain Sterling. Now, the decision for this fight is another one we can talk about. It was very close. When it comes to this one as well, I think Aljo could have etched it out in my book, but Movsar Evloev stays undefeated still. Blake, do you have any final thoughts before you head out here on Sean also said he thinks Aljo won. Aljamain Sterling versus Movsar Evloev.
Yeah, man, I don't think Sean's too far off on that. Appreciate you again, Sean. As always, you're always a consummate watcher, and we appreciate your listenership and your watchership. I thought Movsar Evloev probably edged it out, but it is close, man. I think Aljo did a solid job, but it was just a grappling. It was a grappling match, and those are always a little harder to judge, I think, because striking is pretty easy. You know when somebody gets hit in the face and when you don't. When you're talking about grappling, you're talking about somebody who's taking control, somebody who's in a dominant position or a dangerous position. Both of those guys, even though I personally felt that Evloev was being in the more submissive position majority of the time, I wasn't able to really gauge his dangerousness when he was in a good position. You know what I mean? So I probably, my opinion is null and void on this. I don't even listen to me because I'm an idiot. But I just think, yeah, Johan, I'm an idiot. But I just think that it was a good overall fight, and there's no way I can tell you who was the winner because each guy did a lot of good things in different positions, in different threatening positions, that it was a toss-up to me. I mean, if you would have told me Aljo won, I would have been mad. If you told me Evloev won, I really wouldn't have been mad. I just didn't. Even though I'm one of those, as all three of us are, somebody who does pay attention to grappling a little bit more than just striking, as the kind of the casual fan does. I just thought it was kind of a toss-up.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think this one is one that could have been a toss-up in both ways. Elias, what were your thoughts on this one? And who do you have winning on this one?
I thought Movsar won. I thought it was close. Definitely not like a robbery. I think this was a very close fight. They both were on point with their performances. I have to agree with Marcel though, because he's saying when Aljo had the upper hand, he was holding on, whereas Movsar had the upper hand, he was throwing strikes. I want to add to that because in the scrambles, Movsar, when he was scrambling, it was to dominate position. When Aljo was scrambling, it was to get out of danger. And I think the little details in those grappling exchanges, I think made the difference in the fight. I think that, Movsar a lot stronger than I thought. I thought Aljo was going to be able to utilize his wrestling a lot more, but Mozart seemed like the stronger guy, maybe because he's the natural 145 pounder. But overall, I think that he edged the fight. I think that the striking was a little better, but again, it was very neck and neck.
I can't disagree with you. I can't disagree with you, Johan. I think you're 100% right. Now that once you said it, I started thinking about it, and I'm like, you're right. Aljo was more trying to get out of danger than Evloev was when he was in a hot position, or like Marcel said, actually trying to inflict damage.
Yeah,
It's one of those where when you look at it, who's doing what in what position is really what matters. And I think maybe both of you guys swayed me on this because I watched the whole fight, and now getting a little bit of outside interference, I'm like, you're kind of right. Both of you guys are having good points. Like, I don't think that Evloev was ever really truly in danger as much as Aljo was trying to get out of danger.
And I think the main thing with me is that third round. I think Sean puts it best. Aljo had like 2 or 3 takedowns in the third round. Mosar only had one. Aljo had like 2 or 3 minutes control. Mosar had one. Yes, he did land a couple of extra punches on the bottom, but how much of those were meaningful compared to the length of time that Aljo had in the third round? Because it was very easily 1-1, right? Aljo had the back in the first round. Mosar had the back in the second round. And then Aljo, to me, had the more dominant, or not dominant, had more time in that third round, but it was definitely close. But yeah, I mean, Elias, do you think Mosar is, like Marcel said, do you think he is next for Topuria? Do you think that's the next fight we see?
I mean, I would think so, but there's two guys ahead of him. I think that the UFC is pushing towards first. I think that Alexander Volkanovski, that rematch, I think for the UFC makes a lot of sense and a lot of money. And I think Diego Lopez, with the hype that's going around him, he makes a lot of sense. And you have to think about it. I agree. I think he should be next based off his record and his performances, but he doesn't have an entertaining style. And for fighters who don't talk really well, who are not very marketable and don't have an entertaining style, it takes a long winning streak to to really get that title shot. But honestly, somebody's has got to shout out Marcel Pierre.
Right, but I mean, I think that's what makes it interesting, right? Because you have 2 undefeated guys. That's what you market it as. Because 2 undefeated guys fighting as a title fight, that's what made Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa very interesting, right? That's what makes some of these fights
It's it.
just a
I'll
little more
tell you,
interesting.
yeah, I'll tell you what though, that fight's not going to be close though.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, that fight would be an absolute mugging with the way that Ilia Topuria hits with that. But I do want to, because I mean, there was a couple. I mean, the potential retirement of Anthony Smith, Vicente Luque, beautiful submission in the first round. Yeah, let's start with that one. I mean, Dominic Reyes just destroyed Anthony Smith, who looks like he. You want to roll out here, my man?
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to put a damper on y'all. I gotta head out. But I know you guys want to talk about Anthony Smith. I'll talk about it real quick. Anthony Smith, to me, in my opinion, Dominic Reyes looked really good. Anthony Smith, he's a weird fighter, man. He's somebody that I never actually thought originally I thought he had potential, but none of his fights ever showed that he actually did. And I think Anthony's career would be better sitting behind a desk than it would be in the octagon. That's just me. That's how I feel. I love the guy. He's a really good analyst when it comes to somebody who talks about fights. When it comes to performance inside the ring, I'm just not somebody he's not somebody that I would want to watch, or I'd pay the pay-per-view fight to watch. I don't care. I'm sorry, Anthony. Love you, dude. Just not my guy. Before I leave, though, one guy that I would like to talk about, our guy and Fight Bananas contributor, Brian freaking Battle, dude. Brian freaking Battle went out there tonight and got the dub. And I'm telling you, man, I love it. Everything about him has been fantastic. I interviewed him a long time ago. He's been on Fight Bananas as a contributor many times. The guy is just you can't, how do you not love him, John? How do you not love that guy? But as far as the fight went tonight, I thought he looked really solid. I mean, in the clinch, he looked fantastic. I think at one point he had 43 significant strikes within the clinch, um, while Randy Brown had only 3. Like it was lopsided at one point. I mean, that second round Brian Battle took to himself. There is no question. But Brian Battle got the win tonight. Thank God, because I mean, no disrespect to Randy Brown, but it's just cool to see somebody who's a contributor to Fight Bananas actually come through, just like Jillian Robertson does. Like, it's always cool to see when your family, quote unquote family, wins a fight. And I loved it, dude. Brian Battle, congratulations, good sir. You have everything that is coming to you right now.
Absolutely. I think you said, like you said, he turned it on, man. Those knees in the clinch are absolutely brutal. Like, it's tough to see people really land knees in the clinch like that in that close proximity, But hey, Blake,
Yes.
appreciate you jumping on tonight, man. As always,
Appreciate you, boys.
It's been fun just having you. We're gonna probably cop out a couple more fights here just because there was a couple excited ones
That's
here.
okay.
But yeah, man, Blake, as always.
Johnny and Johan, y'all keep doing what you're doing. Love you both. Thank you so much. All the listeners, all the watchers, thank you guys so much. Appreciate y'all.
And there we have it, Blake.
Now I will exit.
Exiting out the show with that one. But yeah, I mean, it was a very close fight, but yeah, I think those knees in the clinch really are what separated it. Did you have any thoughts on that fight, Battle versus Brown? Because it was definitely a lot, as not as much as with the striking that I thought it would be, but you have to choose where your advantages are and exploit those advantages, right? And I think those knees in the clinch, he did a really good job with that. What were your thoughts on that fight?
Yeah, I definitely thought it was a gutsy performance. That's what I think because he had a really tough weight cut. I mean, obviously he missed weight by 4 pounds, but I also think this was a quick turnaround. He fought 2 months ago, and he's fighting again in the beginning of December. So I think that the recovery time was not the best for Brian Battle. So I think he did everything he could to win, and I think that was the biggest thing. Is he did what he had to do. And I think the clinch game was, it was the deciding factor. I think that, I think the booing was a little. I understand why fans were kind of booing the outcome and stuff, but when you have like a terrible weight cut like that, and you're coming off a 2 month, like coming off a 2 month, bouncing back from 2 months, you got to do what you got to do to win. And I think that he did it. And honestly, I still think he's still a up and coming prospect. And I think he's going to have a big 2025.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. And I love the way he plays to the crowd too, right? He plays a
Yeah,
perfect heel. The
bro,
man
he
knows how
does
to
not
play the
care.
heel.
Flipping
And
them off and everything, I would have done the same thing.
oh man, I love it. I love it. Shout out to potentially the greatest sports entertainer in the UFC, Brian Battle, the Butcher, for getting the win tonight. Um, but man, Vicente Luque, I want to show some love on that one because beautiful right hand drops
Themba
Dembe.
Garimbo.
Yeah, with that, and then my favorite, because Vicente Luque has a special place in my heart. We'll say why, but after that gets the Darce choke. I believe that he gets it in
Anaconda.
Anaconda choke. That's his submission. That's his patented submission. And Vicente Luque was one of those guys that got me into the sport because him versus Mike Perry was one of the most bloody, gutsy, like you guys said. Mike Perry showed a bunch of heart in that fight,
Yeah, what he
and
did to Perry's nose was crazy.
yeah, it was insane, for that fight. But he's always held a special place in my heart. I always felt like he had the potential to be a championship contender, right? He had great striking, finishing, stopping power. Obviously, he had the submissions, but still, just great to see him get some wins. Thoughts on that performance, man?
Yeah, I was happy because he's a fan favorite, but a little sad because I do like Demba Garimbo. I followed his career since like a while ago, since he was fighting still in Africa for EFC. So I've been following him. So it was really, it was a little heartbreaking to see. But man, Vicente Luque, getting that performance, I really thought the UFC was trying to feed him to the wolves, trying to build up Themba in this fight, and Vicente showed that he still has it, man. He still has it. He still can be a quality contributor to the UFC. You know, because after that Joaquin Buckley fight, I wasn't sure. I wasn't really sure. But man, that just the whole sequence, dropping him and then getting that anaconda choke so fast, putting him to sleep. It wasn't like it was a tap. He put him to sleep, and I think honestly, like there's not much to say because it was only like 50 seconds. All we can talk about right now is how much joy we have. That's pretty much all we can talk about. But yeah, man, like Vicente Luque is back, and I think for Themba Garimbo, this is a learning experience. I mean, this was his first. I think this is his first big name in the UFC. You can learn a lot from this. It's not the end. You just gotta, yeah, you gotta learn from these losses.
Right, learn from him, and you'll know you'll kind of get better. You maybe wish for him to have a little bit more time in the octagon with that, instead of just losing that quickly, because now you have a little bit more to analyze. But hey, maybe you're still able to take out something like this. But yeah, I mean, a couple other fights here. And I know somebody asked if they thought Weidman versus Anders was an early stoppage. I mean, I can see why you say that, but he was just on top of him for so long.
Hmm.
What are you going to do? Chris Weidman wasn't showing him too much at that point. Any thoughts on that one? And then after that, if you just want to show any shine on any other fights before we close out tonight.
Yeah, I mean that fight. I mean, it's just I don't think it was an early stoppage, just because I think the ground control of Eric Anders was just kind of just apparent, and I think honestly, like Chris Weidman wasn't really defending himself real intelligently. So it's not like, do you want him to like go lights out? I don't think that would be too much punishment to accumulate. It's kind of crazy to think because 10 years ago, Chris Weidman was the number one middleweight in the world. Arguably besides Anderson Silva and Israel Adesanya, he has the third greatest middleweight title reign of all time. And to see how far he's fallen since losing to Luke Rockhold back in 2016, it's just kind of crazy to think. I think honestly, he should call it a career. I mean he's done everything he could in the sport. There's really not much for him to do. Like unless you're gonna fight like, dude, I should sit next to my bed, honestly. But unless you're gonna fight like a legacy fight against another legend, there's like not really much for you want to do. Like there's no reason for you, a former world champion, to be main eventing a fight pass anymore. You know what I mean? Your legacy is set. You beat Anderson Silva twice. You beat Lyoto Machida. You beat Vitor de Belfort. You defended the belt, I think, 3 times. There's really not much for else you to do.
Yeah, and at this point, it's what more do you want out of your career? And Sean, actually, I'm at my girl's house, so that's why it's not the usual red background like always with that. Chiesa did look good
Yeah.
tonight. That was actually quite impressive on his showing as well. I'm not sure. Maybe he gets the call in UFC for. I heard Washington is coming up soon. They might want to do a fight night in Washington. But yeah,
Is that
Chiesa
Spokane?
looks really good.
Is that the one in Spokane, Washington? Or
I think it's going to be at in. I could be wrong. I'm not really exactly sure, to be honest. I wouldn't want to give you a wrong answer. But yeah, Chiesa looked
yeah.
against Max
I, I
Griffin, man.
I saw the ending of it. I was still interviewing Malcolm at that time, but no, I saw the ending of it. It was pretty impressive. And it's always good to see Michael Chiesa get a win.
Absolutely. And I thought, this is almost like another fighter where he's showing a little bit more layers a little bit down
Mhm.
the line, right? With that one. But hey, man, we're getting up 2:45 here on the East Coast around this side. We had a bunch of great fights tonight. Main card had a lot of intrigue with what we had going on here tonight. I think out of this one, out of a 10, I'd probably give it like a 7.2. I think the undercard really carried this card, to be honest. I was riding it real good with this undercard. Main card was pretty solid, but there were some lulls with it. But I mean, end of the night was still pretty good with the Pantoja's excellent performance Final thoughts, Elias.
Yeah, I would give this card like around a 7. I would say around a 7 because I definitely hyped myself up more for the card than what it actually what the output was. And I think the output was exactly what most fans thought it would be. Definitely the undercard was a lot more exciting than I thought it would be, and I thought that it made the fight card start out great. I definitely think that Duho Choi started out the main card great with his performance, and then we had Kron Gracie, who his fight should have been on Tubi, if we're being completely honest with you. But here or there, we learned something about. We learned. There you go, Blake. We learned something about Shavkat that maybe he's not the invincible Kazakhstani warrior that we all thought he was. You know what I mean? Maybe he's not the boogeyman of the division. Maybe he's not the next welterweight champion. We learned something about Alexandre Pantoja that a lot of people have already known, is that he is definitely the best flyweight in the world right now. Maybe an underappreciated champion just because he might not be the best talker. He might not be, the most marketable name, but damn it, can he fight? The best scrambler in the UFC, someone who just has that dog in him, if we're being honest. Like the way that how laser focused we were against Kai Asakura was crazy. The thing is, too, is, we still don't know where Kai Asakura's level is at now. Because since he didn't beat Alexandre Pantoja, we know he's not at championship level yet. But is he top 5? Is he top 10? We don't know, because he got finished by Pantoja, and like Blake said earlier, the other title defenses, they went the distance. Oh yeah, for sure. I've seen it. I've seen it in person too.
I might take a fight one day, though.
I might too. Honestly, I thought about it, but honestly, I think it was a good way to. I think it was a great way to end the year, because last year we had Colby Covington and Leon Edwards, and I hated that fight. I hated that fight so much. I hated the way Colby Covington. It felt like a stain in my underwear. That's how it felt, like a streak. It felt like a shit streak. So this was definitely better than last year. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes from the flyweight division, because honestly, the flyweight division, I think, is super underrated, and I think it's on fire. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and I think one of those things, sometimes it scares you when you have too dominant of a fighter, especially at flyweight. If Dana is just like, hey guys, move up at this point, right? But no, I think this card, it was just, like you said, it started off really well. Main card had a couple fights you're excited. I do want to answer this. If would have been more excited with Bilal tight and not Garry, you would have had 2 title fights, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that main event would have really been intriguing, especially seeing what we saw tonight. It would have been a lot more intriguing, given that one too. But no, I think the main cards overall, and
hot take.
Yeah.
Hot take. I think if DJ came out of retirement as of now, this version of DJ loses to Pantoja. This version of DJ.
I don't know, man. That's a tough one to call.
It is a tough one.
DJ still knocked out Marias with a flying knee in his last fight, didn't he? That was his last fight, or he had one more after that.
No, he beat him by decision in his last fight, but his fight before he beat Marias.
Right.
Listen, I'm just saying, this version of Pantoja versus this version of DJ, who's aging. It's a close fight, but I think Pantoja beats him.
Should be a fun one. Yeah, it's done. It's one fighting big fight. That's true. That is true. Because of the hydration clause and stuff, all that. But
it is very true.
Everybody's talking shit with me here, so my amateur debut is going to come early 2026. I finish school next year, October. I'm calling it right now. But let's go, guys. That's the end of the show. Appreciate everybody, Sean, Marcel, Blake, as always, for being on the show with us. We had who else? We had Derek early in the show. Appreciate everybody as always. Make sure you guys, if you're not already, subscribe, follow, like, all the stuff. I see we got a bunch of reactions already, so we appreciate you guys as always. Make sure you guys run up the numbers here at Fight Bananas. We've been doing crazy. We got Island fights coming next month. We got UFC next weekend. I'll be in Colombia. I don't know if I'm going to do a post-fight show, but we'll see what's up with Blake and see what's going on. But outside of that, guys, we appreciate you guys as always. Love you too, my man. You guys have a great rest of your night. We'll see you guys after the next